All right, today we're diving into a really thought-provoking book, J Sai Deepak's India, That is Bharat. Now, this book offers a pretty challenging new framework for understanding Indian history, its culture, and even its constitution. So let's get into it and see what it's all about. So, the author's whole journey here started with a simple question, a real puzzle. He was arguing the Sabarimala temple case and noticed something odd. Words that should be totally neutral, like traditional, were being thrown around almost like insults. And that sparked a much, much deeper question. What lens are we actually using to look at our own culture? This quote just nails the book's central idea, doesn't it? It suggests there's this invisible system all around us, a cultural matrix, that keeps shaping how we think long after the colonizers themselves have gone. And the whole point of this book is to give us that red pill, to help us finally see the code. Okay, so to really get our heads around this matrix, we first need to make a super important distinction the book talks about between two ideas that sound similar but are worlds apart. So, on one side, you have colonialism. That's the history book stuff, right? The political and economic rule by one country over another. It has a start date and an end date. But on the other side, and this is the key, you have coloniality. The book says this is the logic, the mental framework that was left behind. It doesn't end when the flags change, it lingers. And getting rid of it takes a deliberate, conscious effort. To put it another way, think of it like this. Colonialism was the act of installing a new operating system. But coloniality, that's the operating system itself, still running in the background, shaping how we process everything. It's this deep-seated pattern that sets up one specific worldview, a Eurocentric one, as the universal yardstick for what's modern or rational. So, where did this powerful invisible software even come from? Well, the book argues that its roots go way, way further back than most of us might think. The book traces the beginning of all this, not to the Enlightenment, as you might expect, but all the way back to 1492, the so-called Age of Discovery. The argument is that this entire global project was, from the very beginning, powered by very specific religious and racial ideas that framed how Europeans saw and interacted with the rest of the world. And this image, wow, it just perfectly captures that initial moment, right? You can almost feel the power dynamic shift. This is that first encounter, where one worldview begins to measure, judge, and ultimately impose itself onto another. At the end of the day, the author says this was never just about controlling land or resources. It was about establishing a universal standard for what it means to be human, creating a global pecking order with a very specific identity at the absolute top. All right, so we've got this big global theory. Now let's bring it home. How does the book argue this all played out specifically in India, or as it terms it, Bharat? Well, according to the author, this new operating system went deep. It fundamentally messed with how society saw itself. It created new boxes and labels, twisting indigenous ideas about everything, from how you practice your faith, to your community structure, to your laws, and even how you write your own history. And check this out. This map is super interesting because it visually backs up what the author is saying. The argument is that the commercial drive and the religious mission went hand in hand. This map really shows the scale of the missionary network that was a core part of the whole colonial machine. Okay, so if coloniality is the deep-seated problem, what's the fix? Well, the book lays out a path forward that it calls decoloniality. So what is decoloniality? It's basically the act of consciously uninstalling that old software. It's not about rejecting everything from the West, not at all. It's about challenging the idea that the Western way is the only way, the default setting for the entire world. It's about giving indigenous ways of thinking their voice back. And this is a really crucial point. The book is very clear, and leading scholars in this field are too, that this isn't about some nostalgic trip to a fantasy past. It's about doing the hard work of rebuilding and restoring things in the here and now for the future. So how does all this big picture thinking connect to today? The author brings it all crashing down to earth by focusing on one of the most sacred documents in modern India, the Constitution. And here we get to what is probably the book's most explosive claim, that the DNA of coloniality is literally written into the foundation of the modern Indian state. The argument is that the Constitution of 1950 wasn't a totally fresh start. Instead, it was built on the chassis of a British colonial law, the Government of India Act of 1919. This suggests that the very language we use for rights, the way the government is structured, it might all carry these hidden assumptions from that colonial worldview. It's a bold reframing of the Constitution, not as a break from the past, but in some ways a continuation of it. And that's really the final thought the book leaves us with. It's a huge question, right? If you put on these decolonial glasses and start to see this invisible framework, what else in our laws, our schools, and even in our own heads might suddenly start to look completely different?